Some objects don't get lost by accident. They wait for the right hands to find them. The chandelier light shimmered across the marble ballroom like liquid gold, while violin music drifted softly through the Grand Lexington Hotel in downtown Manhattan. Crystal glasses clinked. Wealthy donors smiled for cameras. Waiters in black uniforms moved silently between tables carrying silver trays filled with champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And in the middle of all that polished luxury, Clara Whitmore kept her eyes lowered as she adjusted the cuff of her white serving shirt and stepped carefully around a woman wearing diamonds the size of ice cubes. Friday charity galas were always the same. Loud laughter, expensive perfume, men pretending not to check stock prices beneath the tablecloth, women pretending not to notice. Clara had worked enough events to understand the rhythm of rich people. They feared silence more than poverty. Table 12 needs another bottle, her manager whispered sharply into her earpiece. Clara nodded once. Calm, quiet, invisible. That was how she survived this city. At 26 years old, Clara knew how to disappear inside a crowded room better than anyone. Her blonde hair was tied into a low bun. No jewelry, no makeup beyond light mascara, nothing memorable. And somehow, that made people trust her around expensive things. The violin music swelled as a line of photographers suddenly rushed toward the ballroom entrance. Conversations lowered into excited murmurs. Clara didn't need to turn around to know who had arrived. Ethan Sinclair. Even the air shifted when billionaires entered a room. She heard his polished Italian shoes against the marble before she saw him. Slow, controlled, confident. Ethan Sinclair moved through the crowd like a man accustomed to doors opening before he touched them. At 38, the founder of Sinclair Capital had become one of the youngest billionaires on Wall Street, though magazines rarely captured what people noticed in person. It wasn't his tailored tuxedo. It wasn't the silver watch on his wrist worth nearly $200,000. It was the distance in his eyes. Like somewhere along the way, success had taught him not to belong anywhere for too long. Mr. Sinclair. Ethan, over here. One photo, please. Camera flashes burst around him like lightning. He smiled politely. Empty smiles. Practice smiles. Clara watched only for a second before lowering her gaze again and continuing toward the service station. People like Ethan Sinclair existed in another universe. Men surrounded by assistants, investors, bodyguards, private jets, and schedules planned 6 months ahead. Men who forgot the names of waitresses before dessert arrived. Still, as Ethan passed beside her table, Clara noticed one detail. Around his neck hung a thin silver chain disappearing beneath his shirt collar. He touched it once absent-mindedly while speaking to an older senator. Not vanity. Habit. The kind people develop around things they cannot afford to lose. 3 hours later, the ballroom had grown warmer from too many bodies and too much wine. Clara moved between tables refilling water glasses while the orchestra shifted into softer music. Near midnight, donors began drifting toward the exits beneath coats worth more than used cars. Someone laughed too loudly near the auction stage. Someone else argued quietly over cryptocurrency. Normal Manhattan things. Clara bent down near table 7 after noticing something glimmer beneath a chair leg. At first she thought it was a dropped earring. Then her fingers closed around cool silver. A necklace. Heavy. Elegant. The chain tangled slightly around itself as she lifted it into the light. The ballroom noise faded for just a moment. Because even before she examined the diamonds, Clara understood this wasn't ordinary jewelry. The pendant was shaped like a white lily crafted in silver and platinum, delicate enough to look almost unreal. One petal carried a small dark burn mark near the edge, barely visible unless the light hit it directly. Clara's breath caught softly. Her thumb brushed the back of the pendant, and suddenly her heartbeat slowed. There it was. The symbol. A tiny hand-engraved lily hidden beneath the clasp. Old-fashioned. Familiar. Clara stared at it too long. The ballroom dissolved around her. Somewhere deep in her memory, pages turned. Pencil sketches. Her mother sitting beside a window years ago with charcoal dust on her fingertips. Some symbols are promises. Her mother had once whispered quietly while drawing lilies across the margins of an old notebook. And promises survive longer than people. Clara blinked hard and looked back down at the necklace in her palm. Impossible. Nobody leaves tonight. The sharp voice shattered the moment instantly. Clara looked up. Across the ballroom entrance, two security guards were already closing the doors. Guests turned in confusion. Conversation stopped. Ethan Sinclair stood near the stage now, one hand gripping the edge of a chair, so tightly his knuckles had gone pale beneath the ballroom lights. For the first time that evening, his expression no longer looked controlled. It looked afraid. "Mr. Sinclair's necklace is missing," a hotel manager announced carefully. "We apologize for the inconvenience, but security needs a few minutes." Murmurs spread through the ballroom like wind across water. Clara looked back down at the necklace resting silently in her hand. Then toward Ethan. His eyes moved sharply across the room, searching faces, calculating. But beneath all that billionaire composure lived something rawer now. Panic. Real panic. Clara lowered her gaze again. Quietly, she closed her fingers around the silver lily while the orchestra stopped playing and silence settled over the ballroom like snowfall. The ballroom no longer sounded like music and laughter to Clara Whitmore. It sounded like tension wrapped in crystal glasses and whispered suspicion. Guests stood in clusters beneath the chandeliers, while hotel security moved carefully between tables, asking quiet questions that only made people more uncomfortable. Somewhere near the bar, a woman in a silver gown complained loudly about missing her driver. Another guest insisted he had a meeting in Boston at 7 the next morning. Clara listened to none of it. Her fingers remained closed around the silver lily necklace hidden inside the pocket of her apron, warm now from her hand, familiar in a way she could not explain. "Nobody leaves until every staff member is checked," one of the security supervisors announced near the entrance. Clara lowered her eyes. Of course. Staff first. Always easier to suspect the invisible people. She moved silently toward the service hallway beside the ballroom kitchen, while other waiters whispered nervously around her. "Do you know how much that thing costs?" one busboy muttered. "I heard it belonged to his mother," another server replied. "They said he almost never takes it off." Clara reached the stainless steel counter near the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water with steady hands. The fluorescent lights back there felt colder than the ballroom chandeliers. More honest somehow. No marble. No orchestra. Just tired cooks cleaning grills and exhausted waitresses rubbing sore feet after 12-hour shifts. "You okay?" asked Diane, another server in her early 40s who had worked at the hotel nearly a decade. Clara nodded once. "Just tired." Diane gave a small laugh while unpinning her hair. Rich people panic differently than normal people. Clara almost smiled at that. Almost. From the ballroom entrance came the sound of polished shoes approaching quickly. Not security. Too measured. Too controlled. Clara looked up just as Ethan Sinclair entered the service corridor. The entire kitchen seemed to notice him at once. Even the dishwashers paused for half a second. Billionaires carried their own gravity. Ethan's tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned now, his tie loosened slightly beneath the harsh white kitchen lights. Without the ballroom glow around him, he looked less like a magazine cover and more like a man who had not slept properly in years. His eyes moved across the room carefully. Not angry. Searching. "Everyone back to work," the kitchen manager said nervously, though nobody had actually stopped working. Ethan ignored the statement. His attention settled briefly on Clara standing near the sink with the water glass still in her hand. Something unreadable crossed his face. Recognition, maybe. Or instinct. Clara lowered her gaze first. Wealthy men notice confidence. But they remembered humility. "Mr. Sinclair," the security supervisor said while hurrying toward him. "We are reviewing the camera footage now." Ethan spoke quietly. Too quietly for most people to hear. The necklace was not stolen for money. The supervisor blinked. "Sir." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Whoever took it knew exactly what it was. Silence settled for a moment beneath the hum of kitchen refrigerators. Clara felt her heartbeat once against the silver necklace hidden in her pocket. Ethan looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the loss of that necklace had opened an old wound nobody else in the room understood. "It belonged to my mother," he added finally. Nobody answered him. Some stories make people instinctively quieter. Ethan nodded once toward the supervisor and turned to leave. Then he stopped. Just for a second. His eyes drifted back toward Clara again. She could feel it before she looked up. "You were serving table 7 earlier," he said calmly. Clara met his gaze carefully. "Yes, sir." "Did you notice anyone near my seat?" His voice remained controlled, but there was something beneath it now. "Hope maybe." Clara could have handed him the necklace immediately. She knew that. Yet something held her still. Not fear. Something stranger. The symbol engraved behind the pendant kept echoing inside her memory like a half-forgotten melody. Her mother sketching lilies late at night near a tiny apartment window in Brooklyn. The smell of old paper and charcoal. Rain against the glass. Some promises survive longer than people. Clara swallowed softly. "No, sir," she answered truthfully. "I did not notice anyone." Ethan studied her face longer than necessary. Most men in his position barely looked at hotel staff. But Ethan Sinclair watched people carefully, like someone who had learned expensive lessons from ignoring details. Clara noticed the faint shadows beneath his gray eyes, the silver at the edge of his dark hair, the exhaustion hidden beneath wealth. For one strange moment, neither of them looked away. Then a sharp voice interrupted from behind. "Mr. Sinclair, we found a guest trying to leave through the west elevator." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. The distance returned to his face like a mask sliding back into place. "Handle it discreetly," he said. "No press." Of course, men like him did not fear scandal because of embarrassment. They feared losing control of the narrative. Ethan turned away again and disappeared back toward the ballroom, while the kitchen slowly exhaled around his absence. Diane leaned closer to Clara once he was gone. "That man looks like he carries thunderstorms inside him." Clara stared down into the untouched water glass in her hand. "Maybe he does." 10 minutes later, Clara finally stepped alone into the employee locker room. The noise of the gala sounded distant now behind thick walls and service elevators. Quiet. Safe. She locked the door softly behind her before reaching into her apron pocket. The silver necklace slipped carefully into her palm beneath the pale fluorescent light. Up close, the burn mark on the lily pendant looked older than she first realized. Not damage from an accident. Fire. Deliberate heat. Clara turned the pendant over slowly. Her breath stopped. There was something else hidden beneath the engraved lily symbol. Tiny initials so faint they almost disappeared into the silver itself. E.M. Clara's fingers trembled for the first time all night. Because those were not Ethan Sinclair's initials. They were her mother's. Clara Whitmore stared at the tiny initials engraved beneath the silver lily, while the fluorescent light above her flickered softly against the locker room ceiling. E.M. Eleanor Monroe. Her mother's name. The air suddenly felt thinner around her. For years, Clara had believed the old sketches, the lilies, and the strange stories her mother whispered before bed belonged to another life entirely. A life lost long before cancer emptied their small Brooklyn apartment of warmth and music and charcoal drawings scattered across the kitchen table. Yet now those same initials rested in her trembling hand inside one of Manhattan's wealthiest hotels, attached to a billionaire's missing necklace. Clara closed her fingers around the pendant slowly. Her mother had never spoken about wealthy families. Never mentioned Ethan Sinclair. Never explained why she stopped restoring antique artwork despite being brilliant enough to lecture museum curators twice her age. All Clara remembered was silence after certain phone calls. Locked drawers. Burned letters inside the sink one rainy winter night. Some things are safer forgotten. Eleanor Monroe had once said quietly while staring out their apartment window. Clara used to think grief had made her mother mysterious. Now she wondered if fear had. A knock sounded suddenly against the locker room door. "Clara." Diane's voice came softly from outside. "Security is checking employee bags now." Clara inhaled carefully before slipping the necklace back into her apron pocket. "Coming." By the time she stepped back into the service hallway, the hotel atmosphere had changed completely. The glamorous gala from earlier now felt tense and brittle beneath the chandeliers. Guests spoke quieter. Smiles looked forced. Near the ballroom entrance, security officers politely inspected purses and suit jackets while managers apologized every 30 seconds to people accustomed to never waiting for anything. Clara moved through the crowd carrying an empty tray, trying not to draw attention to herself. Invisible, calm, steady. But inside her chest, questions kept colliding against each other. Why did Ethan Sinclair possess something connected to her mother? Why had Eleanor Monroe hidden those initials so carefully beneath the clasp? And why did the lily symbol feel less like decoration and more like a warning? "Miss Whitmore." Clara stopped instantly. Ethan Sinclair stood near the staircase alone now, away from the cameras and donors. Without the crowd surrounding him, He looked strangely isolated beneath the soft gold ballroom lights. One hand rested inside his pocket while the other loosened slightly against his side, tense without realizing it. "Sir," Clara answered politely. Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You have worked here long?" "Almost 2 years." He nodded faintly. "You seem calmer than everyone else tonight." Clara glanced toward the ballroom, where nervous guests continued whispering. Panic usually makes situations worse. Something almost resembling amusement flickered briefly across Ethan's face. "Gone in a second. Most people panic when they think a billionaire is angry." Clara met his eyes carefully. "You do not seem angry." Ethan looked away first, toward the ballroom ceiling, toward memories only he could see. "No," he admitted quietly. "Not angry." His voice lowered further. "Just tired." The honesty in those 2 words surprised her more than anything else. Billionaires rarely admitted exhaustion out loud, especially men like Ethan Sinclair who built entire empires on appearing untouchable. Clara noticed then that he was no longer wearing his suit jacket. The sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled slightly past his wrists now. Human details, small imperfections, the kind magazines never photographed. "Why is it so important?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. Ethan's expression shifted subtly. "The necklace." Silence settled between them. Somewhere across the ballroom, a piano player tested soft notes against the keys while staff reset empty champagne glasses. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed a folded handkerchief slowly, more from habit than necessity. "My mother gave it to me the night before she died," he said at last. Clara felt something tighten quietly in her chest. Ethan's gaze remained distant now. "I was 16, angry at her for leaving another charity event early. I thought she cared more about museums and old paintings than she cared about me." A faint, humorless smile touched his face. Teenage boys are not known for wisdom. Clara stayed silent. Some grief sounded holier when uninterrupted. Ethan looked toward the ballroom windows where rain had begun sliding softly down the Manhattan skyline. That necklace was the last thing she touched before the accident. Clara noticed the way he said accident. Carefully, like stepping around broken glass still buried beneath years. "After she died," Ethan continued quietly, "my father locked away almost everything she owned. Said memories made people weak." His jaw tightened briefly, but he could never convince me to get rid of the necklace. Clara's fingers brushed the hidden pendant inside her apron unconsciously. Ethan noticed the movement instantly. Sharp eyes, observant eyes. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "You know something." It was not a question. Clara's heartbeat stumbled once. Around them, the gala noise faded into distant echoes again. She should tell him now. Hand over the necklace. In this strange feeling growing heavier by the minute. Yet the initials burned against her thoughts. Eleanor Monroe. Her mother's name hidden beneath a billionaire's family heirloom. "Sir," Clara began carefully, "did your mother ever know someone named Eleanor Monroe?" Ethan froze completely. Not dramatically. Worse than that. Perfect stillness. The kind that happens when a memory returns too suddenly. Slowly, Ethan looked at her again. Really looked at her this time. Not as hotel staff. Not as background noise in a ballroom. His gray eyes sharpened with something dangerously close to disbelief. "How do you know that name?" Clara opened her mouth to answer, just as one of Ethan's assistants hurried toward them, holding a tablet. "Mr. Sinclair, the surveillance footage is ready." The moment shattered instantly. Ethan's attention flickered toward the assistant, but only for a second. His eyes returned to Clara immediately afterward. "Focused now. Certain. Do not leave the hotel tonight," he said quietly. Then he turned and disappeared toward the private conference hallway, while Clara stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, her hand pressed unconsciously against the hidden silver lily resting over her heartbeat. Rain streaked softly across the glass walls of the Grand Lexington Hotel, while Manhattan shimmered below, like scattered gold beneath the midnight storm. Inside the ballroom, the charity gala slowly resumed its performance of elegance, but the mood had changed. Conversations were quieter now, smiles more careful. Even the orchestra sounded restrained, as if the missing necklace had unsettled something larger than expensive jewelry. Clara Whitmore stood beside the dessert station, arranging silver forks no one would notice were perfectly aligned. Her hands moved automatically. Her thoughts did not. "Do not leave the hotel tonight." Ethan Sinclair's voice kept replaying in her mind with unsettling clarity. Not demanding, not threatening, certain. Clara glanced toward the private conference corridor where Ethan had disappeared nearly 20 minutes earlier. Security guards still stood nearby, discreet but alert beneath the soft hotel lighting. Whatever was happening inside that room had become more serious than a lost necklace. Diane approached, carrying empty champagne flutes stacked carefully against a tray. "You look pale," she whispered. Clara forced a faint smile. "Long shift." Diane lowered her voice further. "People are saying the necklace belonged to some old European family before Ethan Sinclair's mother owned it." Clara's fingers paused briefly against the silverware. "People always invent stories around rich families." "Maybe," Diane shrugged. "But apparently his mother was obsessed with antique art restoration before she died." Clara felt cold immediately. Not outside cold. The deeper kind. Like hearing footsteps in an empty house. Before she could answer, one of the hotel managers crossed the ballroom quickly toward her. "Clara, Mr. Sinclair is requesting you upstairs." Diane's eyebrows rose instantly. Clara remained still for half a second too long. "Me? Private suite on 38, the manager said quietly. "Now." The elevator ride felt strangely silent despite the soft jazz music playing overhead. Clara stood alone inside mirrored walls watching her reflection under pale lighting. White serving shirt, black apron, tired blue eyes. Invisible girl from Brooklyn heading toward a billionaire's private floor, carrying secrets she did not understand. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway beyond looked less like a hotel and more like a museum. Dark walnut walls, antique paintings beneath soft gold sconces, thick carpet quiet enough to erase footsteps completely. A security guard opened the final door without speaking. Ethan Sinclair stood near the window overlooking Central Park, his back turned toward the room. He had removed his tie entirely now. One hand rested inside his pocket while the other held a crystal glass untouched beside him. The suite itself was enormous but strangely cold. Elegant furniture arranged too perfectly. No family photos. No warmth. Just expensive silence. Ethan did not turn immediately when Clara entered. "When I was 12, he said quietly while staring out at the rain. "My mother disappeared for 3 days." Clara stayed near the doorway. Ethan finally faced her slowly. "Nobody knew where she went. Not my father. Not security. Not even her assistant." His gray eyes looked tired in a way money could not fix. "When she came back, she carried sketchbooks filled with lilies." Clara felt her pulse quicken beneath her apron pocket. Ethan noticed instantly. "You know something about those lilies." Clara hesitated. The room seemed too quiet for lies. Slowly, she reached into her apron and removed the silver necklace. Ethan froze the moment he saw it resting in her palm. Not relief first. Pain. Clara crossed the room carefully and placed the necklace onto the table between them. "I found it beneath table 7. Ethan stared at the pendant silently for several long seconds before touching it with almost unbearable care. Like someone afraid memories could break if handled too quickly. "You could have turned this over to security immediately," he said softly. "I know, but you did not." Clara looked down briefly. "Because I saw something engraved beneath the clasp." Ethan's eyes lifted sharply toward hers. "The initials." Silence answered him. Ethan exhaled slowly and sat down for the first time since she entered. The billionaire suddenly looked less powerful seated there beneath the dim sweet lighting. Less guarded. "Tell me the name," he said quietly. Clara swallowed once. "Eleanor Monroe." Ethan closed his eyes immediately. Not dramatically, just exhaustion mixed with memory. Rain tapped softly against the massive windows behind him. "I have not heard that name in almost 20 years. Clara stared at him carefully. Who was she? Ethan opened his eyes again, though something vulnerable remained inside them now. "My mother's closest friend." Clara's breath caught. Ethan looked toward the necklace again. "They met in Florence restoring Renaissance paintings together before I was born. Eleanor was brilliant." A faint smile touched his face briefly. "My mother used to say she could repair damaged art so carefully that even time became embarrassed." Clara felt tears threaten unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. That sounded exactly like her mother. Ethan continued quietly. "Then one day Eleanor disappeared without explanation." "No," Clara whispered before thinking. Ethan looked at her sharply. Clara's voice softened. "She did not disappear." Ethan said nothing. Clara stared toward the rain beyond the windows while old memories returned piece by piece. Her mother working overnight shifts restoring damaged church paintings in Queens, selling jewelry quietly after hospital bills arrived, burning letters in the sink while crying silently at 2 in the morning. My mother was sick for years, Clara said carefully. Before she died, she kept one sketchbook hidden inside our apartment. Ethan leaned forward slightly now, listening completely. Every page was filled with lilies, Clara continued, and one phrase repeated over and over. Ethan's expression changed subtly before she even finished. Some promises survive longer than people, they both said at the exact same moment. Silence crashed into the room afterward. Heavy, unavoidable. Clara stared at Ethan in disbelief while he looked equally shaken, because suddenly this no longer felt like coincidence. Somewhere beneath the rain and the silver necklace and the dead women connected by lilies, two strangers had just spoken the same sentence from memory. For several seconds, neither Clara Whitmore nor Ethan Sinclair spoke. The rain continued falling against the enormous glass windows behind them, while Manhattan glowed quietly beneath the storm like another world entirely. Somewhere 38 floors below, traffic lights reflected against wet streets in blurred red and gold lines. But inside the suite, time seemed to slow around a sentence spoken by two people who should never have known the same words. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, studying Clara with an intensity that no longer felt suspicious. It felt personal. My mother used to say that phrase whenever she restored damaged paintings, he said quietly, especially the ones ruined by fire. Clara lowered her eyes toward the silver lily necklace resting between them on the table. Mine too. Ethan stared at her for a moment longer before standing slowly and crossing toward an antique cabinet near the far wall. He unlocked the bottom drawer with a small brass key from his pocket and removed a weathered leather box carefully wrapped in dark cloth. Clara noticed immediately how differently he handled this object compared to everything else in the room. Slower. Reverent. Ethan placed the box onto the table and opened it gently. Inside rested old photographs, folded letters yellowed with age, and several charcoal sketches protected beneath thin sheets of tissue paper. Clara's breath caught softly the moment she saw the lilies. The lines, the shading, the unmistakable hand behind them. Those are hers, Clara whispered. Ethan nodded once. My mother kept them hidden after Eleanor disappeared. Clara reached toward the top sketch carefully. Her fingertips stopped just above the paper without touching it fully. A white lily sketched beside a cathedral window, another beside ocean waves, another half-finished beside a handwritten note in faded ink. Clara recognized the handwriting instantly. Her mother always curled the letter Y slightly lower than normal, like the tail of a ribbon. Ethan watched her expression carefully. You know these drawings. Clara swallowed. I grew up with them. Silence settled heavily between them again. Not awkward silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that changes things. Ethan picked up one of the photographs slowly. Two women stood beside each other in front of a massive painting restoration scaffold somewhere in Europe. One elegant and poised with dark hair pinned neatly beneath a silk scarf. The other younger. Softer. Laughing at something outside the camera frame while holding charcoal pencils in stained fingertips. Clara felt tears threaten unexpectedly. That is my mother, she whispered. Ethan nodded faintly. And mine. Clara looked closer at the photo. Eleanor Monroe looked alive there in a way Clara barely remembered. Not tired from hospital visits or overtime shifts. Not carrying silent grief behind her eyes. Just bright, warm, human. Ethan studied the photograph too, though his expression carried something heavier. Regret perhaps. My mother trusted very few people, he said quietly. But she trusted Eleanor completely. Clara hesitated before asking the question that had been growing louder inside her since the ballroom. Then why did they stop speaking? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He looked toward the rain again before answering. Officially, he gave a humorless smile. Nobody knows. Clara remained silent. Ethan continued softly. But after my mother died, my father blamed Eleanor for everything. Clara frowned slightly. Why? Ethan looked down toward the necklace resting beside the sketches. Because of the fire. The room suddenly felt colder. Clara remembered the burn mark on the silver lily pendant. Ethan noticed the realization crossing her face. You saw it. Clara nodded once. Ethan sat down again slowly, his his voice quieter now. 20 years ago, my mother and Eleanor were restoring artwork inside a private estate in Florence. One night, part of the archive caught fire. Clara listened carefully. Ethan's gaze darkened with old memory. Most of the paintings survived, but something else disappeared from the collection afterward. The necklace, Clara whispered. Ethan looked surprised for half a second. Yes. Clara stared down at the pendant again. My mother never stole anything. The words came out firmer than she intended. Ethan's eyes lifted toward hers immediately. I did not say she did. Clara exhaled slowly, embarrassed by how quickly she defended Eleanor Monroe even now. Ethan noticed anyway. You loved her very much. Clara gave the smallest nod. She was all I had. Ethan looked away after that. Not because he was uncomfortable, because he understood. After the fire, he continued quietly. Eleanor vanished. My father spent years convincing everyone she betrayed our family. Clara's fingers tightened unconsciously together. But your mother did not believe that. Ethan's expression softened almost invisibly. No, he picked up one folded letter from the leather box carefully before handing it across the table to Clara. The paper trembled slightly in her hands as she opened it. The handwriting belonged to Ethan's mother. Eleanor would never destroy beauty for money. If she disappeared, it was because she believed she was protecting something more important than reputation. Clara read the sentence twice, then a third time. Tears blurred the ink slightly beneath the sweet lighting. Ethan spoke softly after a long silence. That letter arrived 3 weeks before my mother died. Clara folded it carefully again. Did your father ever read it? Ethan gave a cold smile. My father only believed things that protected his legacy. Clara understood that sentence more than she expected. Wealth often built walls around truth instead of opening doors toward it. Ethan leaned back quietly while thunder rolled faintly beyond the city skyline. There is something else, he said finally. Clara looked up. Ethan's gray eyes settled on her with unsettling certainty now. My mother believed Eleanor hid something inside the necklace before she disappeared. Clara glanced toward the silver lily immediately. Ethan lowered his voice further. Something important enough to survive 20 years. The room fell silent once more. Then slowly, almost instinctively, Clara turned the pendant over inside her hands again. Her fingertips brushed along the burned edge of the silver lily carefully this time. And suddenly she felt it. A tiny shift beneath the metal. Barely noticeable. Hidden. Ethan saw her expression change instantly. What is it? Clara looked up slowly, her pulse quickening beneath the quiet, sweet lights. I think. Her voice nearly disappeared. I think this necklace opens. The silver lily rested between Clara Whitmore's fingertips while rain whispered against the towering windows of Ethan Sinclair's private suite. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The room itself seemed to lean into the silence. Ethan watched her carefully now, no longer like a billionaire questioning a hotel employee. He looked at her the way people study old maps after realizing they have been lost for years. Clara traced the burned edge of the pendant once more. Tiny grooves hidden beneath the silver petals pressed softly against her thumb. There, she whispered. Ethan stepped closer immediately. What did you find? Clara tilted the necklace slightly toward the warm table lamp beside them. Under the softer light, a nearly invisible seam appeared beneath the engraved lily symbol. Her heartbeat quickened. It is a latch. Ethan frowned faintly. I have worn that necklace for almost 20 years. Clara glanced up carefully, and nobody knew it opened. The words settled heavily between them. Ethan crouched beside her near the table now, close enough for Clara to notice the faint scent of cedar and rain lingering against his dress shirt. Yet there was nothing intimidating about him anymore. Only tension, curiosity, hope trying not to disappoint itself. Clara pressed gently against the hidden seam again. Nothing happened. She adjusted her grip and remembered suddenly how her mother used to hold fragile objects while restoring antique frames. Never force old things. They break when frightened. Clara exhaled slowly before rotating the pendant counterclockwise instead. A soft click echoed through the quiet suite. Ethan froze instantly. The silver lily opened like unfolding petals beneath her fingers. Inside rested a compartment no larger than a postage stamp, and hidden within it was a tiny folded piece of paper protected beneath thin wax lining. Neither of them spoke. Clara carefully lifted the paper free with trembling fingers while Ethan stared at the necklace as though seeing it for the first time in his life. The folded note looked impossibly old, delicate, time-stained around the edges. Clara unfolded it slowly beneath the lamplight. Her breath caught immediately. Ethan stepped closer. "What does it say?" Clara stared silently for several seconds before answering. "It is handwritten." Ethan's expression darkened with recognition. "My mother?" Clara shook her head once. "No." Her voice softened almost to a whisper. "Mine." Ethan went completely still beside her. Clara swallowed carefully before reading aloud. "If anything happens to me, protect the boy first. The truth must wait until he is old enough to survive it. Eleanor." Silence crashed into the room afterward. Not confusion. Shock. Ethan stared at the tiny note in Clara's hands while thunder rolled faintly across the Manhattan skyline outside. "The boy," he said slowly. "That means me." Clara looked toward him quietly. "Yes." Ethan turned away abruptly toward the windows, one hand covering his mouth briefly as though steadying himself against memories arriving too fast. Clara watched the reflection of the city lights across the glass behind him while her own thoughts spiraled deeper into uncertainty. Protect him from what? Why hide a message inside a necklace for 20 years? And why had Eleanor Monroe believed the truth itself could destroy someone? Ethan finally spoke again without facing her. "When my mother died," his voice roughened slightly. "There were rumors afterward." Clara remained silent. Ethan rested one hand against the window frame, staring out over the rain-covered city below. People claimed the fire in Florence was not accidental. Clara felt cold immediately. Ethan continued quietly. "My father shut down every investigation within weeks." Clara frowned faintly. "Why?" Ethan laughed softly then, a tired sound without joy inside it. "Because powerful families protect themselves before they protect the truth." The sentence lingered heavily in the room. Clara looked down toward Eleanor's hidden note again. The handwriting suddenly felt less like memory and more like warning. Ethan turned back toward her slowly. "My father always said Eleanor Monroe betrayed our family and disappeared afterward because of guilt." Clara met his eyes directly this time. "Do you still believe that?" Ethan said nothing at first. Then quietly, "I do not know what to believe anymore." Rain continued streaking against the windows while the city below moved on unaware. Taxi lights, midnight traffic, lives untouched by silver necklaces and buried secrets. Clara folded the tiny note carefully again before placing it beside the sketches on the table. "There is more," she whispered suddenly. Ethan looked up. Clara pointed toward the inside lining of the necklace compartment. "Look." Ethan leaned closer beneath the lamp. Tiny letters had been engraved inside the hidden metal cavity itself, so small they almost disappeared against the silver. Ethan narrowed his eyes while Clara tilted the pendant toward the light. "Florence, October 14th. Saint Cecilia Archive." Ethan's expression changed immediately. Clara noticed it before he spoke. "You know that place?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It was the archive damaged in the fire." Clara looked back toward the engraved words. "What happened there?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Officially, a wiring accident destroyed part of the restoration wing." Clara waited. Ethan's eyes darkened slightly. Unofficially, he hesitated. "My mother believed someone was trying to steal documents hidden inside the archive." Clara's pulse quickened. "What kind of documents?" Ethan looked toward the necklace again. "She never told me." Then more quietly, "Maybe because I was the boy Eleanor wanted protected." The room fell silent once more. Clara suddenly remembered something else from childhood. A memory so small she had ignored it for years. Her mother kneeling beside a cardboard box filled with old papers during one winter blackout in Brooklyn. The candlelight shaking softly across Eleanor Monroe's tired face while she whispered one sentence Clara never fully understood. "If anyone ever asks about Florence, tell them I painted flowers." Clara felt her breath catch sharply. Ethan noticed instantly. "What is it?" Clara looked up slowly, fear and realization colliding behind her eyes. "I think our mothers were hiding something far bigger than stolen art." Before Ethan could answer, a hard knock echoed suddenly against the suite door. Both of them startled at once. Ethan crossed the room immediately while Clara instinctively folded Eleanor's hidden note back into her hand. One of Ethan's security men stood outside the door, looking unusually tense. "Sir," he said carefully, "your father just arrived at the hotel." Ethan's entire expression changed in an instant. Not anger. Something colder. Older. the kind of tension people carry from wounds that never healed correctly. Then the guard added quietly, "And he is asking questions about the waitress." The moment Ethan Sinclair heard his father had arrived, the warmth disappeared from the room entirely. Clara Whitmore felt it instantly. 1 second Ethan had been a man standing beside old photographs and hidden letters beneath soft lamplight. The next, he looked like the billionaire the world knew again. Controlled, untouchable, dangerous in the quietest possible way. He closed the leather box carefully before looking toward the security guard at the doorway. "Where is he?" "Private lounge on the east floor, sir." Ethan nodded once. "Keep him there." The guard hesitated slightly. He specifically requested to see Miss Whitmore. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. "That will not happen, sir. He already spoke with hotel management downstairs." The guard lowered his voice carefully. "He knows she found the necklace." Silence settled heavily across the suite. Ethan dismissed the guard with one sharp nod before the door closed again behind them. Clara remained still near the table while rain tapped softly against the windows beside the skyline. "Your father moves quickly," she said quietly. Ethan gave a cold smile, without humor. "My father built an empire by arriving before the truth did." Clara studied him carefully. There was no affection in the way he spoke about Arthur Sinclair, only exhaustion sharpened by years. Ethan loosened his cufflinks slowly as though steadying his thoughts through routine. "When my father enters a room," he said quietly, "people stop speaking honestly." Clara glanced toward the hidden note still resting near the necklace. "Because they are afraid of him?" Ethan looked toward her. "Because he makes certainty feel expensive." The sentence lingered strangely in the room. Clara understood it anyway. Men like Arthur Sinclair did not need to raise their voices. Wealth itself became pressure. Silence became leverage. Ethan crossed toward the bar near the windows and poured water into 2 crystal glasses before offering one to Clara. She accepted it carefully. "Thank you." Ethan leaned lightly against the counter afterward, staring at the rain beyond the glass. "You should know something before you meet him." Clara's fingers tightened slightly around the glass. "I am going to meet him." Ethan looked at her directly now. "If you refuse, he will only become more suspicious." Clara said nothing. Ethan's jaw shifted subtly before he continued. "Arthur Sinclair spent 2 decades erasing Eleanor Monroe from every conversation connected to my family." Clara felt cold again at the sound of her mother's name. "Why?" Ethan looked down briefly. "Because dead women cannot defend themselves. And because my father hates uncertainty more than guilt." Clara watched him carefully. Beneath the billionaire composure, she could see something older tonight. A son carrying inherited silence like weight across his shoulders. Ethan walked back toward the table and picked up the old photograph of their mothers together in Florence. After the fire, Eleanor disappeared. My father claimed she stole historical records from the Saint Cecilia Archive before fleeing Europe. Clara frowned softly. "But your mother did not believe it." Ethan shook his head once. "No," he looked toward the hidden note again. "And now neither do I." Clara lowered her gaze. "My mother barely spoke about Florence." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Maybe because she was protecting you." The words landed harder than Clara expected. Protecting her from what? Questions multiplied faster than answers tonight. Before she could speak again, the suite phone rang sharply across the room. Ethan answered immediately. Clara could not hear the voice on the other end clearly, but she watched his face grow still again. Not surprised. Prepared. "We are coming down," he said quietly before hanging up. The room fell silent afterward. Ethan slipped the necklace carefully back around his neck. This time Clara noticed how deliberately he touched the silver lily before fastening it beneath his shirt collar. Not possession. Memory. He then folded Eleanor's hidden note and placed it inside his wallet without explanation. Clara looked toward him. "You trust me with all of this very quickly." Ethan paused before answering. No, his honesty almost startled her. Then more quietly, "But I trust my mother." Clara felt something shift softly inside her chest at those words. Ethan glanced toward the leather box one final time before closing it completely. "Arthur Sinclair will ask questions tonight." Clara nodded slowly. Ethan stepped closer then, lowering his voice slightly. "Do not let him decide who your mother was." Clara met his gaze carefully. "And if he already has?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Then maybe it is time someone finally told him he was wrong." The elevator ride downward felt colder somehow. Ethan stood beside her in silence while soft jazz music drifted overhead through hidden speakers. 38 floors descending toward a man neither of them truly wanted to face. Clara watched their reflections in the mirrored walls. Ethan tall and composed in rolled-up sleeves and dark trousers. Clara small beside him in a hotel waitress uniform carrying generations of secrets she never asked for. Yet somehow tonight, the difference between them felt smaller than before. The elevator doors opened into a private marble corridor guarded by two men in dark suits. One of them nodded immediately toward Ethan. "Mr. Sinclair is waiting inside." Ethan did not answer. He simply walked forward beside Clara until the lounge doors opened slowly before them. Arthur Sinclair stood near the fireplace with one hand resting atop a silver cane polished to perfection. Older than Ethan by nearly 30 years, yet carrying the same sharp gray eyes beneath neatly combed silver hair. Expensive tailoring. Perfect posture. The kind of man who probably believed weakness began with wrinkles. He turned the moment they entered. His gaze landed on Clara instantly. Not curious. Measuring. Clara felt it immediately, like being studied rather than seen. Arthur Sinclair smiled politely, though nothing warm existed inside it. "So," he said calmly, "you are Eleanor Monroe's daughter." The room went silent. Ethan stiffened beside her almost imperceptibly. Clara looked at Arthur steadily despite the pressure in the air. "You knew my mother." Arthur's smile faded slightly. "Unfortunately," he said softly, "better than anyone." Arthur Sinclair's voice carried the kind of calm that made people lower their eyes without realizing it. The private lounge itself glowed softly beneath amber lights and polished wood walls while rain continued sliding against the distant windows overlooking Manhattan. Yet the warmth of the room disappeared completely beneath his presence. Clara Whitmore stood quietly beside Ethan Sinclair, her hands folded carefully in front of her apron while Arthur studied her with unsettling precision. "You have her eyes," Arthur said softly. Clara did not answer immediately. Ethan did. "That is enough." Arthur glanced toward his son without changing expression. "I am speaking to Miss Whitmore." Ethan's jaw tightened subtly. Clara noticed it instantly. Years of silence existed between these two men. Heavy years. Arthur stepped closer slowly, his silver cane touching the marble floor with soft, measured sounds. "I was surprised when security informed me the necklace had resurfaced tonight." Clara met his gaze carefully. "I returned it because it belonged to Mr. Sinclair." Arthur smiled faintly. "Did you?" The question lingered strangely. Clara felt Ethan shift slightly beside her, protective without saying so aloud. Arthur noticed that too. Of course he did. Men like Arthur Sinclair noticed everything. "You resemble your mother more than I expected," he continued quietly. "Eleanor Monroe was talented." Clara heard the pause before the next word. "Troubled." Ethan spoke immediately. "Do not do that." Arthur looked toward him calmly. "Do what?" "Rewrite history simply because nobody challenged you." The silence afterward sharpened instantly. Clara watched Arthur carefully now. The older man never raised his voice. He did not need to. His control itself became intimidation. Arthur rested both hands lightly atop the silver cane before speaking again. "Your mother made dangerous decisions, Ethan." Ethan laughed once under his breath. Cold. Disbelieving. Interesting choice of words from a man who buried entire investigations. Arthur's eyes hardened slightly for the first time. "I buried scandal. You buried truth." Clara remained still between them while old wounds moved silently through the room like smoke. This was not merely family conflict. It felt older, deeper. Built from decades of silence, nobody survived cleanly. Arthur turned back toward Clara again. "Did Ethan tell you what happened in Florence?" Clara answered carefully. "Only that there was a fire." Arthur nodded slowly. "There was also theft." Ethan stepped forward immediately. "Enough." Arthur ignored him completely. Historical records vanished from the Saint Cecilia Archive that night. Documents connected to European banking families, political figures, and private collectors. Clara frowned softly. "Why would my mother be involved in something like that?" Arthur's expression sharpened slightly. "Because Eleanor Monroe was present when those records disappeared." Clara felt uncertainty rise sharply inside her chest. Ethan spoke before Arthur could continue. "My mother trusted Eleanor with her life." Arthur finally looked directly at his son again. "And that trust destroyed her." The room fell silent. Clara noticed Ethan's hands close into fists briefly before relaxing again. Control. Constant control. Arthur sighed softly afterward, almost tired. You were too young to understand the damage at the time. Ethan's voice lowered dangerously. No, I was simply too young to question you. Arthur looked away toward the rain-dark windows. Everything I did was to protect this family. Ethan gave another quiet, humorless laugh. You always confuse protection with control. Clara watched both men carefully. Same gray eyes, same composed posture. But where Ethan carried restraint, Arthur carried certainty. One still searching for truth, the other convinced he already owned it. Arthur finally turned toward Clara once more. Your mother disappeared because she knew what she had done. Clara felt something inside her steady unexpectedly then. Not anger. Clarity. No, she said quietly. Arthur paused. Clara lifted her gaze fully now. My mother spent the rest of her life hiding from something. But it was not guilt. Arthur studied her silently. Ethan said nothing. Clara continued softly. People who are guilty erase evidence. My mother erased herself. The sentence lingered heavily in the room. Arthur's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The first crack in his certainty all evening. Clara reached carefully into her apron pocket, then removed one folded charcoal sketch from earlier. The drawing of the lily beside the cathedral window. She placed it gently onto the table between them. Arthur stared at it instantly. Clara noticed the reaction before he concealed it again. Recognition. She kept drawing lilies because she was trying to remember something important, Clara whispered. Not because she was hiding stolen money or documents. Arthur remained silent. Ethan's eyes moved slowly between the sketch and his father now. Watching closely, Clara took one slow breath before speaking again. And if my mother truly betrayed your family, her voice softened. Why did your wife keep her drawings for 20 years? That question landed harder than anything else tonight. Arthur looked away immediately, just for 1 second. But Clara saw it. Ethan saw it too. The old billionaire's composure flickered beneath the soft lounge lighting like a crack spreading through glass. Ethan stepped closer to the table quietly. Mother knew Eleanor was innocent. Arthur's jaw tightened. Your mother was emotional. Ethan's voice sharpened instantly. No, she was honest. Silence crashed through the lounge afterward. Even the rain seemed quieter against the windows now. Arthur stared toward the fireplace for several long moments before finally speaking again. There are things you still do not understand. Ethan answered immediately, then explained them. Arthur looked toward him slowly. Tiredness appeared in his face for the first time all night. Real age beneath wealth and power. Some truths destroy people, he said quietly. Clara felt her pulse quicken at those words. Ethan did too. Arthur's eyes moved briefly toward the hidden necklace beneath Ethan's shirt collar. Your mother believed certain records inside Saint Cecilia could ruin families across Europe if exposed publicly. Clara remembered the hidden note instantly. Protect the boy first. Arthur continued softly. After the fire, Eleanor vanished alongside those records. Ethan frowned sharply. And you never considered she disappeared because someone was trying to silence her. The room went still again. Arthur looked at his son carefully, then at Clara, then finally toward the rain beyond Manhattan's skyline. I considered it every day for 20 years, he whispered. Ethan froze completely. Clara felt cold spread through her chest. Arthur closed his eyes briefly before speaking one final sentence. Because 3 days before the fire, his voice roughened slightly. Eleanor Monroe came to me terrified and said someone inside our own family could not be trusted. Arthur Sinclair's final sentence remained suspended in the private lounge long after the words themselves faded. Rain moved softly against the windows behind Manhattan's skyline, while the fire crackled low inside the marble fireplace. Nobody spoke immediately. Clara Whitmore stood motionless beside the table with Eleanor Monroe's sketch resting between crystal glasses and old family silence. Ethan Sinclair stared at his father as though seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Who? Ethan asked quietly at last. Arthur looked older suddenly beneath the amber lights. Not weaker, just tired in a way powerful men rarely allowed themselves to appear. He loosened one hand from the silver cane and rested it against the edge of the fireplace. Eleanor never gave me a name. Ethan frowned sharply. But you believed her. Arthur said nothing for several seconds. Then softly, more than I wanted to. Clara watched him carefully now. The certainty Arthur Sinclair carried earlier had begun to fracture around the edges. Not because he lacked power, because memory was finally becoming heavier than pride. 3 nights before the fire. Arthur continued quietly. Eleanor came to my study in Florence carrying a folder she refused to leave unattended. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Ethan remained completely still beside her. Arthur's eyes drifted toward the rain-covered windows as if the memories lived somewhere beyond them. She said records hidden inside Saint Cecilia connected several influential families to illegal transfers during the 1980s. Money moved through art collections, private foundations, shell charities. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Arthur gave a faint, humorless smile. Europe has always hidden its sins behind paintings and wine cellars. Clara glanced unconsciously toward the silver lily necklace beneath Ethan's collar. Arthur noticed. Eleanor believed someone discovered she had seen those records during the restoration project. Ethan spoke carefully now. And Mother? Arthur closed his eyes briefly before answering. Vivian wanted to expose everything publicly. Silence fell again. Clara looked down toward Eleanor's charcoal sketch. Suddenly the lilies no longer felt symbolic. They felt like breadcrumbs left by frightened women trying to survive long enough for the truth to matter. Ethan crossed slowly toward the windows, one hand resting against his hip while he stared out over the city below. You spent 20 years blaming Eleanor Monroe, he said quietly without turning around. Arthur's voice lowered. Because after the fire, the records vanished. Ethan looked back sharply. Or because blaming a missing woman protected the Sinclair name. Arthur did not answer immediately. The absence of denial said enough. Clara felt something ache quietly inside her chest then. Not anger. Sadness. Her mother had spent years hiding from accusations built by people wealthy enough to decide which story survived. Arthur finally looked toward Clara directly. Your mother was trying to protect someone. Clara nodded slowly. The boy. Arthur's eyes softened slightly. Yes. Ethan frowned. Me? Arthur hesitated before speaking again. The records connected certain financial transfers to individuals very close to our family at the time. Eleanor feared if those names became public, you would become leverage against your mother. Ethan stared at him silently. Clara saw realization move slowly across his face now. Childhood memories rearranging themselves. Bodyguards appearing unexpectedly. Schools changing without explanation. Constant security disguised as privilege. Arthur continued quietly. After the fire, Eleanor disappeared before anyone could question her publicly. Vivian believed she fled because she was protecting both of you. Clara felt tears threaten unexpectedly. Her mother had not vanished from guilt. She had vanished to shield a child who was not even hers. Ethan turned away sharply toward the rain again, emotion tightening visibly beneath his controlled posture. And Mother died believing Eleanor was innocent. Arthur nodded once. Yes. The room grew silent except for the distant storm outside. Then Clara remembered something suddenly. A detail buried beneath years of ordinary life. Wait. Both men looked toward her immediately. Clara's voice trembled slightly. My mother kept a storage unit in Brooklyn. Arthur's expression sharpened. Ethan stepped closer. Clara searched her memory carefully. She almost never visited it. But every October, her breath caught softly. She brought fresh white lilies there. Ethan stared at her. You think she hid something inside? Clara nodded slowly. I used to think it was just old paintings. Arthur straightened immediately despite his age. Do you know the address? Clara closed her eyes briefly, remembering subway rides through Brooklyn winters beside Eleanor Monroe's quiet figure carrying flowers wrapped in brown paper. Then she nodded. Yes. 2 hours later, the rain had softened into mist over lower Manhattan, while a black town car moved silently through nearly empty Brooklyn streets. Clara sat beside Ethan in the back seat, while Arthur remained unusually quiet across from them. No one looked like enemies anymore, just survivors arriving late to the same truth. The storage facility stood between an old laundromat and a closed bakery with flickering neon lights. Nothing glamorous, nothing worthy of billionaires. Clara unlocked the small unit slowly with trembling hands. The metal door groaned upward beneath the pale fluorescent hallway light. Dust floated softly through the cold air inside. Old canvases leaned against walls beneath white sheets. Cardboard boxes stacked carefully beside antique frames. And near the back corner sat a small wooden chest covered with hand-painted lilies. Clara stopped breathing for a second. I remember this, she whispered. Ethan moved beside her carefully, while Arthur remained near the entrance in complete silence. Clara knelt slowly before the chest. Her fingers traced the faded lily painted across the lid. Then she opened it. Inside rested dozens of documents sealed carefully in waterproof wrapping beside one final envelope, smaller than the rest, addressed in Eleanor Monroe's handwriting. For Ethan. Ethan stared at the envelope without moving. Clara lifted it gently before placing it into his hands. The billionaire who once terrified boardrooms across continents suddenly looked like a 16-year-old boy standing beside grief again. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the letter. Clara watched his eyes move across the page beneath the cold storage light. Then stop. Ethan inhaled sharply before lowering the letter slowly. Clara's voice softened. What did she write? Ethan looked toward her with eyes no longer guarded by wealth or status or pride. Only emotion. She wrote. His voice nearly failed him. Some people protect the truth by speaking. He swallowed carefully. Others protect it by disappearing. Silence filled the tiny storage room afterward while rain whispered faintly outside Brooklyn's sleeping streets. And for the first time in 20 years, Eleanor Monroe was no longer a ghost blamed for surviving. She was simply a woman who chose sacrifice over safety and carried silence so a child she loved could grow up free.